The bus doors hissed open and Megan Carter stumbled inside, exhaustion weighing down every step. The night air was crisp, but inside, the vehicle was stuffy and packed with weary commuters. She clutched her bag tighter, scanning the rows of seats for an empty spot. Before we continue with today's story, if you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber helps me keep sharing these inspiring tales that touch your day. Thank you for your support. Her head ached and her feet throbbed after an intense 12-hour day at the marketing firm where she interned. The city lights blurred past the foggy windows, casting flickering reflections onto the passengers. Then she spotted a single empty seat near the middle of the bus. Without hesitation, she moved swiftly through the aisle and dropped into the seat, exhaling in relief. It wasn't until she settled that she noticed the man sitting beside her. He looked to be in his early 30s, dressed in a well-fitted navy suit with a loosened tie. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it. One too many times that day. His sharp jawline and piercing green eyes gave him an air of quiet authority. But he remained unreadable, staring out the window as the city rushed by. Megan paid him little attention. Her body was beyond tired, her head heavy from the day's endless meetings and the pressure of proving herself. As the bus jolted over a pothole, she let out a quiet sigh and let her eyes flutter closed. She told herself she'd only rest for a moment. The next jolt of the bus sent her head tipping sideways. Unknowingly, she leaned against the stranger's shoulder, her cheek pressing into the soft fabric of his suit jacket. The rhythmic hum of the engine and the gentle rocking of the vehicle lulled her deeper into sleep. Daniel Reed, the CEO of one of the most powerful business empires in the city, stiffened slightly at the unexpected weight against him. He turned his head, glancing down at the young woman, now using him as a pillow. His initial instinct was to shift away, but something stopped him. She looked utterly exhausted, her delicate features softened by sleep. Strands of her chestnut hair fell across her face, and her lips parted slightly as she breathed the way she had just collapsed. So unguarded, so trusting in a world that was anything but. He found it oddly amusing. Across from them, a man in a sleek black suit, barely noticeable in the dim lighting, leaned in slightly and whispered, "Sir, do you want me to wake her?" Daniel's lips quirked into the faintest smirk as he shook his head. "No," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "Let her sleep." The assistant hesitated. "But, sir," a subtle glance from Daniel silenced him. The bus continued on the hum of quiet conversations and the occasional honk of traffic filling the space. Megan, blissfully unaware of whose shoulder she had found comfort in, sighed softly in her sleep. Unconsciously nuzzling closer, Daniel found himself chuckling under his breath. But the moment of peace didn't last long. The bus lurched to a stop, causing Megan to stir. Her brow furrowed, and with a slow inhale, she blinked awake. At first, she was disoriented, her mind still caught between exhaustion and reality. Then she realized where she was. More importantly, she realized who she was leaning on. "Oh my God," she gasped, bolting upright so fast that she nearly smacked into Daniel's face. He simply raised an eyebrow, amused by her panic. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her cheeks burning. She had just fallen asleep on a complete stranger. Worse, a very attractive stranger. Before Daniel could respond, Megan glanced out the window and froze. Stop. Her stop had long passed. "Wait, what? No, no, no." She scrambled for her bag in a rush. Her elbow knocked against a paper cup, resting in the cup holder beside Daniel. The lid popped off and dark liquid splashed across his crisp white shirt. Megan gasped in horror. "Oh no." Daniel looked down at the spreading stain, his expression unreadable. The assistant standing nearby stiffened. "Sir." Megan grabbed a handful of napkins from her bag and instinctively reached forward, dabbing at his shirt. "I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. Or I can." Daniel suddenly laughed, a deep, rich sound that caught her completely off guard. She blinked up at him, utterly baffled. "Don't worry about it," he said smoothly, amusement flickering in his green eyes. "I think I owe you anyway." after that rather comfortable nap you took." Megan groaned, covering her face in embarrassment. Megan clutched her bag tightly as she hurried off the bus, her heart still racing from the mortifying encounter. Falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder was bad enough. Spilling coffee all over him, absolutely humiliating. She had apologized profusely, dabbing at his shirt in panic. But in her rush to fix the situation, she hadn't taken a proper look at his face. By the time she had sprinted down the street toward her apartment, the whole ordeal became nothing more than a terrible, sleep-deprived blur. Megan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the blazer over her blouse. Today was important. The intern presentation day. After weeks of grueling work, she and the other interns would finally get a chance to pitch their ideas to the company's senior executives. She had spent countless late nights refining her project, desperate to prove herself. If she nailed this presentation, she had a real shot at securing a permanent position. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her laptop and rushed out the door. The tension in the room was thick as Megan entered the spacious, glass-walled conference hall. Several interns were already seated, nervously whispering amongst themselves. At the head of the long mahogany table sat a group of executives. Their polished appearances radiated power and authority. Her stomach tightened. This was it. She barely had time to take her seat before the main doors swung open again. A hush fell over the room as a man in a sharp navy suit strode inside, his presence commanding instant attention. Megan turned to glance at the newcomer and nearly choked on air. The man from the bus, the man whose shoulder she had drooled on, the man whose shirt she had ruined. Except he wasn't just some random stranger. He was Daniel Reed, CEO of the entire company. Megan's blood ran cold. Daniel moved toward the head of the table and took a seat. His expression was effortlessly composed if he recognized her. He did not indicate this. Megan, on the other hand, felt like her soul had left her body. How was this happening? She stole another glance at him. He sat with one elbow resting on the table, his fingers idly tapping against the polished surface. There was a flicker of amusement in his emerald green eyes, but he remained silent. Did he seriously not remember her? Or was he just pretending? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. "Good morning, everyone." Daniel's voice was smooth and confident. "Let's get started. I'm looking forward to hearing what you've prepared." Megan's heart thudded painfully against her ribs. This was not how she had imagined today. Going one by one, the interns stood up to present their projects. Some fumbled nervously, while others spoke with polished confidence. Megan forced herself to focus, pushing aside her growing anxiety, and then her turn arrived. She stood up, smoothing her blouse, and walked to the front of the room even as she prepared to begin. She could feel Daniel's gaze on her. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the chaos in her head. "My name is Megan Carter, and today I'll be presenting a new digital marketing strategy designed to increase our engagement with Gen Z consumers." As she spoke, she gradually found her rhythm. The room faded away, and all that remained was her and her work. She clicked through her slides explaining how social media trends had shifted, outlining data-driven engagement strategies, and proposing an innovative campaign to modernize the company's brand appeal. By the time she reached her final slide, a quiet confidence had settled over her. "Thank you," she concluded. Stepping back from the podium, the room was silent for a moment, then polite applause. She exhaled slowly, relieved until Daniel leaned forward, finally breaking his silence. "Impressive presentation," he remarked casually. His voice is smooth as ever. "But I do have a question." Megan stiffened. Of course, he had a question. Daniel tilted his head slightly, eyes glinting with something unreadable. "You mentioned that our current digital outreach isn't resonating with Gen Z consumers," he said. "But according to recent analytics, engagement on our TikTok platform has actually increased by 27% in the last quarter. Given that, what specific dataset did you use to support your claim?" Silence. Several interns exchanged uneasy glances. Megan could feel all eyes on her. This was a test. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "That's a great point," she replied, straightening her posture. The 27% increase you're referring to is primarily driven by a short-form content featuring influencer collaborations. However, our long-term brand engagement, meaning the content that translates into actual consumer loyalty, has seen a decline of 15%. My research focuses on that aspect, which is why my proposed strategy emphasizes retention rather than just short-term viral reach. A bit of silence. Then Daniel's lips curved into something almost resembling a smirk. Well argued, he said, nodding slightly. Megan barely had time to process what had just happened before. Another executive chimed in with a different question, shifting the focus elsewhere. But as she returned to her seat, she could still feel Daniel's eyes on her. And for the first time since she had entered the room, she knew without a doubt he remembered her as the final presentation wrapped up. Megan let out a quiet breath, finally allowing herself to relax. She had done it. The weight of Daniel's unexpected question had shaken her, but she had managed to hold her ground, and he had acknowledged it yet. As the meeting adjourned, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Daniel had been watching her the entire time, and now, as she gathered her things, she caught sight of his assistant approaching her with a polite yet unreadable expression. "Miss Carter," the man said, "Mr. Reed would like to see you in his office." Megan blinked. "Me?" The assistant simply nodded. A few interns nearby overheard and exchanged curious glances. Megan could already feel their silent questions burning into her back. Still, she nodded, squared her shoulders, and followed the assistant through the gleaming halls of the corporate building. When Megan stepped into the spacious corner office, she was immediately struck by how different it felt from the intimidating CEO persona Daniel had exuded in the boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and though the furniture was sleek and modern, the space didn't feel cold. A few personal items sat on the bookshelves, a framed photo, a watch resting atop a leather-bound notebook. Little details that made him seem human. Daniel stood by the window, his back to her hands in his pockets. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, without turning, he asked, "You always answer questions that well under pressure." Megan hesitated before responding. "Only when the person asking is trying to catch me off guard." That made him chuckle. He finally turned to face, her arms crossed over his chest. Gone was the sharp, untouchable CEO from the conference room. The man in front of her now looked intrigued. "I called you here because I have a proposition," he said smoothly. "There's a project I'm overseeing personally, one that requires fresh marketing insight. Your presentation showed me that you think differently, and I want that on my team." Megan, stomach flipped. Was he serious? "You want me on your team?" She echoed, still trying to process his words. "I want you as my temporary assistant," he clarified. "Strictly for this project, you'll work directly with me, help develop a strategy, and present it at the final stage." Megan felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her. This was huge. Yeah, most interns barely got FaceTime with executives, let alone the CEO himself. And yet, something about this felt too good to be true. Her mind raced with questions. Why her? Out of all the interns, had he recognized her from the bus and was playing some kind of game? Or did he truly believe in her skills? She hesitated. "Mr. Reed, Daniel," he corrected smoothly. "If we're going to be working together, you might as well drop the formalities." Megan was thrown off by his casual tone. Was he always like this, or was this just for her? She swallowed hard. "This is unexpected." His lips twitched. "Is that a yes?" Megan thought about it. This opportunity could change her career. Working alongside Daniel Reed could open doors she hadn't even dreamed of. But it could also bring problems. And those problems started sooner than she expected. By the time Megan returned to the intern workspace, whispers had already spread like wildfire. "I heard she got called to his office. Probably just a formality." "No, I heard he offered her a position personally." Megan pretended not to hear, keeping her eyes focused on her screen. "Then let's be honest." A voice snickered from the side. "She's pretty there. Probably helped." Megan's fingers froze on her keyboard. Her pulse pounded. Of course. She had worked so hard to prove herself. Yet the first thing people assumed was that she had been chosen because of her looks, not because she had delivered one of the best presentations. Not because she had handled a CEO's question with confidence. Not because she was damn good at what she did just because she was a woman in a room full of men. Jaw tightening. Megan forced herself to keep her expression neutral. Fine, fine. If people wanted to underestimate her, let them, because when she proved them wrong, it would be all the more satisfying. Megan quickly learned that working directly under Daniel Reed was both a privilege and a challenge. He was sharp, demanding, and relentless, always expecting the best. His mind worked faster than most, effortlessly cutting through unnecessary details and printing points before anyone else even noticed them. And yet, despite his intimidating presence, he never micromanaged her. Instead, he challenged her. That's a solid approach. But how can we make it better? You got good instincts, but back it up with stronger data. Don't tell me what the competition is doing. Tell me what they're not doing. Megan had thought she was prepared for the pressure, but nothing compared to the intensity of working side by side with Daniel. Still, she thrived under it. She absorbed everything he taught her, improving each day for the first time. She felt like she wasn't just an intern. She was part of something bigger. But of course, Daniel being Daniel never missed an opportunity to tease her. One afternoon, as they wrapped up a brainstorming session, Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, amusement glinting in his eyes. You know, he mused, I was starting to wonder when you'd fall asleep in this office. Should I get you a pillow this time? Megan nearly choked on her coffee. She shot him a glare. I'm never going to live that down, am I? Not a chance, he said smoothly, a slow smirk forming. Megan groaned, covering her face with her hands. I was exhausted. He chuckled. Oh, I know. He drooled on my shoulder. Remember? Her jaw dropped. I did not. Daniel simply raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. Megan groaned again. I hate you. No, you don't. And she threw a crumpled napkin at him. Late one evening, long after most employees had gone home, Megan was making her way back to her desk when she noticed the lights still on in the main conference room. Curious, she peeked inside. Daniel sat alone at the long table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something different. His elbows rested on the polished wood, his hands clasped together, his gaze fixed on a worn photograph in front of him. Megan hesitated. This was none of her business. But before she could talk herself out of it, her feet were already moving quietly. She stepped inside and approached him. He didn't notice her at first, too lost in thought. Then, gently, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Hey, she said softly. Are you okay? Daniel stiffened slightly as if startled by the touch. For a brief second, Megan thought he might brush her off. Instead, he exhaled, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I'm fine, he said, though his voice held something unspoken. Megan glanced at the photograph on the table, but before she could make out the details, Daniel picked it up and slipped it into his pocket. She could have asked more, but something told her that for now, silence was enough. A week later, Megan walked into a high-stakes meeting, feeling prepared and confident. She had spent days perfecting the new marketing projections, cross-referencing data, and ensuring every slide was backed by solid numbers. But apparently, it wasn't enough for some people. One of the senior executives, a rigid old-school traditionalist named Richard Vaughn, barely let her finish before tearing her apart. This data is weak, he scoffed, flipping through the printed report. Your projections are overly ambitious. Your strategy is idealistic at best, and honestly, I don't see why we're wasting time with this. Megan felt the blood drain from her face. She had expected pushback, sure, but not this level of open hostility. Still, she forced herself to remain professional. I appreciate your concerns, Mr. Vaughn, but if you look at the trend analysis on page 7, I did look, he interrupted coldly. And it's sloppy. You clearly don't understand how this industry works. Megan's grip tightened on the edges of her laptop before she could respond. Another voice cut through the room. Daniels, that's enough. His tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Instantly, the room fell silent. Every gaze turned toward Daniel, who had been leaning back in his chair, watching quietly until now. Miss Carter's analysis is based on real-time market behavior. He continued, his voice calm but undeniably firm, and I trust her judgment. If you have a legitimate concern, address it with facts, not condescension. A tense pause. Vaughn's expression flickered, part irritation, part realization that he had just been called out by the CEO himself. Of course, Surf Ranch finally muttered, flipping through the report again. Megan sat there, stunned. Daniel had defended her publicly, and not because he had to, but because he believed in her for the first time since joining the company. Megan felt like she truly belonged. Megan didn't know when it started. Maybe it was the late nights, working together when exhaustion blurred the lines between professional and personal. Maybe it was the way Daniel looked at her, sometimes like she was the only person in the room worth listening to. Maybe it was the way he had defended her in that meeting, making her feel valued in a way no one else ever had. But somewhere along the way, Megan had started to fall for him. And that was a problem because Daniel Reed wasn't just another man. He was the CEO of a $1 billion empire, a man who lived in a world of power, wealth, and influence, a world she didn't belong to. So Megan did what she had to. She buried it, shoved her feelings deep down, and convinced herself they didn't matter. She was here to work, not to catch feelings for a man who was out of reach. But ignoring her emotions became harder when she realized he wasn't entirely indifferent either. Daniel never crossed a line, but there were moments, little moments, the way his gaze would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his voice softened when they were alone. His usual sharpness was replaced with something different, the way he seemed to seek her out as if her presence grounded him. One evening, as they reviewed reports in his office, Megan accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. She bent down to grab them at the same time Daniel did. Their fingers brushed. The air shifted for a fraction of a second. He didn't move. Neither did she. Then he pulled away, clearing his throat. Be more careful next time. Cold. Detached. Like nothing had happened. Megan clenched her jaw, refusing to let the strings settle in her chest. She had imagined it. It meant nothing. She needed to get over this fast. But then came the conversation that changed everything. It was late. Most of the office had emptied out, but Megan had stayed behind to finalize a report. As she made her way down the hallway, she heard voices coming from Daniel's office. She wasn't one to eavesdrop. Really? She wasn't. But then, fun. So what exactly are you doing with her? A man's voice. Megan froze mid-step. There was a pause. Then Daniel's voice. What do you mean she's not just another intern to you? I see the way you look at her. Megan's heart pounded. Daniel sighed. She's different. There was a silence. Then his friend let out a knowing chuckle. That sounds like trouble. Daniel exhaled sharply. Do you think I don't know that I shouldn't be getting involved? She has her whole career ahead of her and me. He stopped himself. It's better this way. Megan felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. I shouldn't be getting involved. It's better this way. Whatever had been lingering between them wasn't just in her head. But it didn't matter, because Daniel had already made up his mind. He had drawn the line, and now so would she. The next morning, Megan walked into HR with her decision already made. I'd like to request a transfer to another department, she said firmly. The HR manager raised an eyebrow. That's unexpected. You've been doing great work under Mr. Reed. Megan forced a polite smile. I just think it's time for a change. A lie, but one she had to tell because staying meant prolonging the inevitable. Staying meant torturing herself with what-ifs, staying that, waiting for something that was never going to happen. She wouldn't be that girl. So she handed in the paperwork and walked away. Daniel Reed had never been the type to dwell on things. He made decisions, executed them, and moved forward. That was how he built his empire with precision, control, and discipline. But ever since Megan transferred to another department, something felt off. His office felt too quiet. Meetings fell into routine. He no longer had someone challenging his ideas with clever insights or throwing him playful glares whenever he teased her. At first, he ignored it. It was better this way. That was what he had told himself. That was what he had told his friend. But if it was the right decision, then why did it feel so wrong? It had been 2 weeks since Megan left his team. Daniel hadn't seen much of her, just a few passing glimpses in the office hallways where she would offer him a polite nod, but nothing more. She was keeping her distance. And Daniel, he let her until the day he saw her laughing with another man. He had been walking past the marketing floor when he spotted her. She was standing by the coffee machine, her head thrown back in laughter, her eyes sparkling as she playfully nudged the guy beside her. A junior executive named Eric. Eric was young, ambitious, and clearly interested in Megan. Something inside Daniel snapped. It wasn't rational. It wasn't planned. But for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something he couldn't control: jealousy. That evening, Daniel found a reason to be near Megan's department. She was at her desk reviewing reports, completely unaware that he was watching her from across the room. He finally cleared his throat. "Carter." Megan looked up, startled for a moment. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. Then her expression went cold. "Mr. Reed," she said formally. Daniel's jaw tightened. "So that's how we're playing it now. Can we talk?" he asked. Megan hesitated before responding. "I'm a little busy. It won't take long." She studied him for a second, then sighed, setting down her pen. "Fine. What is it?" Daniel didn't speak immediately. Now that he was standing in front of her, he realized how much he had missed her presence. "Why did you transfer?" he finally asked. Megan blinked, clearly not expecting that question. Why do I?" His voice was quieter now. "Because if you can tell me it was just for a change of pace, I don't buy it." Megan exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "Daniel? I don't. Was it because of what you heard?" He cut in. That caught her off guard. Her fingers curled slightly on the desk. "So Daniel nodded. Megan let out a hollow laugh. "Then you also know that I made the right choice." His stomach twisted. "No," he said quietly. "You didn't." She looked at him, then really looked at him like she was searching for something. Daniel took a breath and finally admitted the truth. "I tried to stay away from you." He confessed. "I told myself it was the right thing to do, that it would be easier. But then you left," and he stopped exhaling. "I realized I didn't want easier." Megan's breath hitched for a moment. Neither of them spoke. Then softly, she asked Daniel, "What are we doing?" Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "I don't know." He took a step closer. "But I do know that every day without you on my team is felt wrong. And every time I see you smiling with someone else, He clenched his jaw. "I hate it." Megan swallowed hard. "I hate that I feel this way," he admitted. "But I do." A long silence stretched between them. Megan looked down, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. "Daniel, you're you, and I'm just. Don't." His voice was firm. "Don't tell me you're just anything." She hesitated, but the doubt was still there. The fear. They came from different worlds. He was a CEO, powerful, wealthy, untouchable. She was an intern who had barely started her career. Was she really supposed to believe they could be something more? Daniel must have seen the hesitation in her eyes, because his next words left no room for doubt. The next day, Megan was walking into the main office cafeteria when she heard his voice. "Megan." She turned, and the entire room went silent. Daniel was standing by the entrance, his expression unreadable. Megan's stomach flipped. Not here, not in front of everyone. But Daniel didn't seem to care about the eyes on them. "I'm taking you to dinner tonight," he said. "Don't say no." A collective gasp spread through the room. Megan's face burned. "Daniel, you can't just—" "I can't," he interrupted. "And I just did." Whispers erupted around them. "Is this really happening? He's never done this before. Oh my God, is she actually dating the CEO?" Megan's pulse was out of control. But Daniel was completely calm. His eyes locked onto hers. "You can run if you want," he said, voice quieter now, "but I'm done running." Megan's breath caught, and at that moment she knew. So was she. Megan stared at the email on her screen, her heart pounding. Subject: job offer. Marketing. Associate. A prestigious firm, one of the top in the industry, was offering her a full-time position with a significantly higher salary and room for rapid advancement. It was everything she had worked for. But as she sat there rereading the words over and over, she felt conflicted because taking this job would mean leaving Daniel. Later that evening, Megan sat across from Daniel in his office. She had rehearsed a dozen ways to bring it up, but when she finally spoke, her voice was hesitant. "I got an offer," she said quietly. Daniel, who had been reviewing documents, looked up an offer. She nodded. "It's a great opportunity. A major firm, better pay, more growth potential." Daniel studied her for a moment, then set his pen down. "That's amazing, Megan." His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. There was something there, something he was holding back. Megan swallowed hard. "I'd have to relocate." Silence. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. How far across the country? She saw the way his jaw tensed, but he didn't stop her. He didn't say stay. He didn't try to convince her otherwise. Instead, after a long pause, he simply said, "You should take it." Her breath hitched. "Daniel, this is what you've worked for," he said, his voice quiet. "You earned this." Megan's chest tightened. "But what about us?" Daniel held her gaze, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked torn. "Megan," his voice was gentle but firm, "I would never ask you to give up your dreams for me." Tears burned in her eyes. She had prepared for an argument. She had prepared for him to fight for her. But she hadn't prepared for this. For him to let her go. "Is this really what you want?" she whispered. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "No," he admitted, "but it's what's right for you." Megan's heart shattered because he loved her enough to let her go. The night before she left, Daniel came to see her one last time. They stood in the doorway of her apartment, neither of them speaking at first. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. Megan's throat tightened. "I don't want to say goodbye." Daniel reached up, gently, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then don't." A sad smile tugged at his lips. "Say, see you later instead." Megan let out a shaky laugh, even as tears streamed down her face. She threw her arms around him, holding on like she never wanted to let go. And for a moment, neither of them moved, because no matter how much they loved each other, sometimes love wasn't enough. Megan had everything she had ever wanted. On paper, at least, her new job was a dream. The projects were exciting, the pay was excellent, and she was finally making a name for herself in the industry. Everyone around her saw her as a success. But Megan, she felt empty at first. She convinced herself it was just the adjustment period. A new city, new colleagues, new routines. But weeks turned into months, and the feeling never went away. Every morning, she woke up feeling like something was missing. Every night, she went to bed, knowing exactly what it was. Daniel. She had tried to move on. She had gone on dates, thrown herself into work, done everything she could to distract herself. But nothing ever came close to what she had with him. Because no matter how far she ran, her heart had never really left. It had always been back there with him. It was an ordinary Thursday morning when Megan found the envelope on her desk. Her name was written on the front in familiar, neat handwriting. Her breath caught. Slowly she opened it. Inside there was a single bus ticket and a note. "I'm still waiting for you on that bus. Don't fall asleep this time." Megan's hands trembled. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Daniel. It had been months, and yet he was still waiting. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing her coat, she ran. The city was buzzing as Megan sprinted down the familiar streets. By the time she reached the bus stop, she was breathless from running, from hope, from everything. And then she saw him standing by the bus sign, hands in his pockets, watching her with that same infuriatingly calm expression like he had always known she would come. Megan froze. Her heart caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. "You," she breathed. Daniel's lips twitched. "Me?" Megan shook her head, still panting. "You. Actually." She let out a breathless laugh. "You actually sent me a bus ticket?" He shrugged. Seemed fitting. She laughed again, half in disbelief, half in overwhelming joy. And then she stopped because suddenly the reality of it all hit her. "You idiot," she whispered, eyes burning. "You let me go." Daniel's expression softened. "I thought it was what you needed." Megan swallowed, stepping closer, and now Daniel held her gaze. "Now I know that what I need is you." She sucked in a shaky breath. "And what about I don't care?" His voice was firm. "Not about the company. Not about what people think. Not about any of it." He took a slow step forward. "I just care about you." Megan's throat tightened. She had spent months telling herself they were from different worlds. That would never work. That love wasn't enough. But standing here with Daniel, looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered, she finally realized something. Love was the only thing that had ever mattered. She didn't wait for another second. Throwing her arms around him, she pulled him in. Daniel exhaled sharply, wrapping his arms around her like he was never going to let go again. And as they stood there in the middle of a crowded city in the place where it had all begun, Megan finally felt whole. Because after all this time, after all the distance, she was finally home. Sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it's about finding your way back to the person who was meant for you all along. Megan and Daniel came from different worlds, one a rising intern, the other a powerful CEO. But in the end, none of that mattered because real love doesn't care about titles, distance, or obstacles. It just finds a way. And when it does, you have to be brave enough to hold on and never let go. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. We bring you emotional, heartfelt stories that remind us of the power of love, resilience, and human connection. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that stirs your soul. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.